My play of the day from round 5 of the Tile Memorial Tournament is the game between Magnus Carlsen and Viswanathan Anand. It's another chance for us to gauge the strengths of these players before their World Championship match in November. Carlsen, with the white pieces, opened with d4. And, well, unusually for Carlsen, this was a very regular opening indeed, the so-called Nimzo Indian defence. And here the main line is bishop d3, and then c5 or d5 and so on. But here Carlsen played knight e2. Okay, this is slightly offbeat. I mean, it's still been seen hundreds of times. From a strategic point of view, very sound indeed. The knight protects the knight on c3, preventing the pawns being doubled. The only problem is, of course, it blocks the bishop on f1 and so loses time. It's rather an old move. It doesn't have a fantastic theoretical reputation, but it's not a bad move by any stretch. Now here I've seen Carlsen take on d5 before, that's possible, but today he played a3. Now if black were to exchange on c3, then this straightens out white's pieces. White already has the two bishops, must be already a little better for white. So understandably Anand played the bishop back to e7, but this is completely normal. Now you can see black's position very straightforward, normal development, looks like a queen's gambit type position. White's knight on e2, however, blocks white's development. So Carlsen took on d5, and here is quite an interesting strategic moment. Black can recapture in both ways, pawn or knight. Recapturing with the pawn leads to a very complex position indeed. For example, there's a very old game here between Petrosian and Khan from 1954, and you can see that white very often likes to advance the pawns on the king side, gaining space, whereas black counters through the middle. Now this is extremely sharp, very double-edged position. I'm sure that's what Carlsen was aiming for. But instead, Anand played in a calmer way, much calmer way. That he risks less by recapturing with the knight. Okay, bishop d2. Of course, this bishop very often stands outside the pawn chain, but there's a pawn on e3. But this helps the rook to come to c1. This is very important because black is going to attempt to break at some point with c5 to break down white's pawn on d4. So bishop d2 makes a lot of sense. Now Anand has actually played this position before against Aronian a few years ago and didn't get a very good position. The game went something like this, and here, well, Aronian already stood very comfortably indeed. So I think Carlsen had done his homework here. And Anand thought for some time, almost a quarter of an hour, and played knight d7. Well, that's a reasonable move. It could be that, well, black is just developing, but it could be that black is preparing c5. Sometimes black even goes for e5 as well. It's all about breaking down that pawn on d4. Carlsen developed the king's bishop. Very sound indeed. And now here, Gelfand once played knight f6 in this position. Not a bad move at all. The idea is actually to break with e5. And, well, this was against Aronian, and they had a very sharp game indeed. I mean, it's a very, very unclear position, actually. It's an interesting position. But this wasn't Anand's intention. He played b6 quite quickly, and they're actually following a game of Ponomariov's against Kramnik. And here Kramnik played knight f6 and actually lost a very long game. Let me just show you these moves very quickly. This is Ponomariev against Kramnik from Vikings A 2003. I'm just going to show you one moment in this game. Now you can see that black suffers a little bit because this pawn is a bit backward. It's not quite clear whether it should go to c5 or not. And here Ponomariev played bishop to b4, exchanging off this so-called bad bishop for black's good bishop here. And after that, Ponomarev was always slightly better. Now, let's have a look at the game. So this is Carlsen against Anand, bishop b7. And here, before castling and before anything else, he played bishop b4, the same idea as Ponomarev, and a nice idea. Okay, so it's about exchanging off this bad bishop. Black has various options here. Well, first of all, we should look at what happens if bishop takes bishop. Now, you might think that these double pawns are a problem, but in fact, white can use this pawn very well to try to cramp black's pawns here. And also the pawn really controls c5 and discourages the move c5 as well. Also, the a file is opened. So I think from a strategic point of view, this is actually quite favourable for white. Now, what else do we have? Well, c5 is a really important move. This obviously changes the structure of the position. Now, it's not clear to me how white would play here. You could just drop the bishop back. Now, I can understand why Anand didn't do this, because it means that black always has to look out for the pawn on d5. White, well, after castling, white will be able to attack this with knight f4, maybe queen c2 and rook to d1, and there'll be a lot of pressure on this pawn. It could be that you take here straight away and play bishop c3. That's another way of playing the position. But I can understand why Anand didn't want the responsibility of these hanging pawns. You can also see this is very typical. There's a pin here, which makes it difficult for black to free himself. So after almost 8 minutes thought, Anand played knight to f6. And development took place. And rook e1. That's a very clever move indeed. Making sure there are never any pins here, and, well, preparing for a central break much later on, unbelievably. Or even shortly. Black's position would be absolutely fine if this pawn were on b7. Then this would be a strong pawn chain. The problem is that with the pawn on b6, c6 is permanently weak. So black always has to look out for that. Also, this bishop is really poorly placed on b7. So already white has some advantage here. You know, there's a very simple plan of the minority attack. It's also possible to maneuver this knight round to e5. And there's something else that white has too in this position, as we'll see. So knight f4, good move. And now, and this is already difficult for black, because normally to sort of offset a weakness on the queen side here, you need some kind of counterplay against the king. But I mean, white's king is absolutely rock solid here. Very difficult to get an attack. So I think Anand is kind of struggling here already. Now, you know, maybe you should wait with a move like rook d8 or something like that. I mean, maybe redeploying the knight round to e6 is also possible. But, I mean, you can see that, you know, white has such a pleasant position here. Black is passive. But certainly the move that Anand chose, bishop c8, I think was definitely the wrong plan. As we're about to see, black doesn't really have time to redeploy this bishop. So the pawn is on prise. Now, if bishop d7, then queen b4 I think is a nice move, because once again, this endgame is very attractive for white, with pressure here and on the a file as well. So Anand played rook c7, and Carlsen found an excellent move. While black's pieces are all stuck on the queen side, Anand just Carlsen advanced through the middle with f3 and e4, and this is already tremendous for white. I mean, maybe the best black has is to drop the queen back, but then you can take this and keep pushing. So white has this wonderful kingside pawn majority, but there's also the c-pawn that black always has to worry about, and somehow without the light squared bishop it makes things even more vulnerable, because once one goes then everything will go. But Anand took on e4, and this was really disastrous. Now there's still a threat of e5. He dropped back with queen d7, and very quickly Carlsen seized his opportunity. d5 is just a winning move, actually. And this next sequence is forced. Pawn takes, exchange of queens, knight takes, all forced, and now bishop h3. And this is a killing move. There is no decent way for black to defend that pawn. For example, rook e8, then you take on d5 and e6 caves in, or rook d6, then e5 wins a piece, or king f7, again e takes d5, and not good. So Anand chose to give up a pawn like this, and this is the most accurate, pushing the knight first and then taking here. Well, when I say give up a pawn, the material is now level, but white dominates completely. Rook c7, excellent move. Now we can see the strength of rooks and bishops working well together. So the bishop covers c8, not possible to challenge. The rook dominates on the 7th. It's all over. And after this, another great move, bishop d7. Anand resigned in this position. The bishop controls the queening square, so suddenly the pawn is coming through. And we can mop up the d-pawn here. It really is all over. Well, if knight d5, then just rook b7. Again, everything is held. If knight g6, let's just see. I mean, this is... Black can struggle on for a few moves like this, you know, knight e5. Now, can't take here because of the check, but, well, for example, king g2. And bishop b5 is a good move, followed by e7. And, well, black is utterly lost in this position. A really convincing victory of Carlsen, and actually rather embarrassing for Anand to lose so rapidly and in such poor fashion. Actually, it can't do his confidence any good for the World Championship match. So there we go. After 5 rounds, Nakamura and Gelfand lead with 3.5. Gelfand won a very smooth game today against Morozevich, and Mamedyarov and Carlsen have 3 points. By the way, on Thursday, the free day in the Tom Memorial, I'll be giving one of my power play shows on playchess.com, so do join me then. I'll be examining some of Magnus Carlsen's very poor endgame technique. Thanks for watching.